Okay, salam everyone. Welcome back. I hope you've enjoyed and learned a lot from what we've done so far for you, the first two panels. So this final panel is going to focus on just writing a personal statement and a research proposal. So what I'll do now is I will actually talk through my own personal statement that I used when I was applying to Oxford and the one that actually worked because I did get in. And then we have Hazim Asghari, who is going to talk through his research proposal. Because when you apply, sometimes they ask for a personal statement, sometimes a research proposal, and there are subtle, well, very major differences actually between both of them. So you'll be able to see exactly what that entails. So I will just introduce myself if you have not attended the first two, but otherwise I'm a third year DPhil student at Oxford and I do oncology. And my research basically focuses on trying to develop blood tests for the early diagnosis of cancer. And I'm also the graduate academic officer at the Islamic Society here at Oxford. And Hazim, who will join us for the second half, is a first year PhD student in history of science and medicine, also at Oxford, and his DPhil research pertains to the early centuries of Islam in the Mediterranean, particularly how technology and natural philosophy were influenced and informed by different worldviews. So I'll just share my screen because I have some slides and I'll basically read you through my personal statement and sort of highlight what makes a good personal statement. Um, that's full screen. That's me out of the way. So, if you, when you're applying, basically you can actually, you should definitely go to the departmental website, the course website. And for every course at Oxford, they have this little page which tells you, about the degree, the entry requirements, resources, funding costs, college preference. And then here in the how to apply section, they have exactly what you need. And so for my course, the DPhil in oncology, I needed a personal statement. And these guidelines, they're actually very crucial. They're not just a starting point. This is what you need to focus on and really, let me see if I can use a laser pointer. Yeah, so these, are not just a starting point. This is what you should keep in mind. And they're not just joking when they say your personal statement will be assessed for all these things. So your reasons for applying. Well, let's try and keep these in mind, as many as you can. And then as we're going through my personal statement, we'll try and see if I actually checked all of these. So, reasons for applying, evidence of motivation for and understanding of the proposed area of study, commitment to the subject, preliminary knowledge of research techniques, capacity for sustained and intense work, and reasoning ability. And then in the final line here, it says that the personal statement should focus on your personal research experience in this field rather than personal achievements and interests. And so this is going to be different for different PhDs, and different universities will ask for different things. So for each university and everything you're applying to, please go and use this. So some general tips. You need to address a few key things in your personal statement. You need to convey, because a lot of this is your application, this is what they see, this is how they select whether they want to call you for an interview. So they will look at obviously the rest of your application, which has your grades and your background, what undergraduate degree or master's that you've done, um, any other sort of research experience, but this personal statement is just absolutely essential to tell them who you are. And so, really needs a lot of work and thought. So, questions to address: why am I interested in doing a PhD, and career goals? They want to know that. Why am I interested in this project? What experience do I already have of research? Why am I interested in this particular lab? This is also very important. when you're first contacting a supervisor before you're applying to the PhD, and maybe you just want to arrange a meeting with them, these questions are also a good guideline of what you can mention in your email. What if I got to offer, as in your experience, what you bring, and why should you even respond to me? Because academics are very busy. If you send them just a generic email that you forwarded to 20 other labs, they can very easily see that. And oftentimes it's happened that multiple people in the same department have received the same exact email, and they share it around for laughs, like this candidate is actually just bulk sending emails to all of us, but isn't really interested or putting in the effort. So use these guidelines. And then in terms of how to get started, what I always used to do is a massive sort of brainstorm. I prefer to call them brain dumps of, my research experience, what skills I have, every small little thing that I've done, every, volunteering, everything I've been involved in at university. I will just like write these things down, and what skills I might have gained from all of these that are actually going to be relevant for the PhD. Then, just think about your achievements, just small things, competitions or whatever you've been involved in. Just make sure you have that in front of you. So then you can pick out the most relevant and important ones. And then, all my research interests. This was also quite hard to nail down for me because I was interested in lots of different fields as well. And so you need to have sort of clarity as much as possible about everything, all of these different aspects. So really give it a lot of thought and a lot of brainstorming. In terms of when you're actually writing the personal statement, you have limited a number of words. So this one was like a maximum of 1,000 words. And I wanted to make sure that every single line conveyed something new and something important, something that, tells them about me rather than just a generic line. No line in my personal statement was irrelevant, or I felt like every line had to make the statement better and better and better. If one line doesn't do that, then I just cut it out, because you need to be very focused. Nothing useless on there. So potential skills, obviously think about what a PhD is, talk to people, and then these things always come out, independent thinking, critical thinking, creativity, problem solving, persistence, these kinds of things. So you have to pick out not just any skill, like, oh, I'm great at, cooking, but it has to be very relevant to the PhD. So put those skills in. So now we're going to start going through my personal statement. And I think, about 5 paragraphs. And so the first one, I usually, for all of my personal statements, I usually like to open with a sort of a slightly eye-catching statement, or something that, it just captures their attention. And so it doesn't always have to be like that. Obviously, a lot of people just say, why they want to apply, or I'm applying to this because, but it was my way of doing it. So I started by saying, before I started my A-levels, most schools refused to admit me onto the program because they deemed good grades unachievable with my non-GCSE background. So, it's like, oh, this person has been refused from schools. What is happening? So it kind of catches their attention. And then I say that at the end of the 2 years, I obtained not only 3 A stars, but also, 5 awards, 2 of which were the highest marks in the world at physics in 2013 and 2014, where at least 10,000 students sat each exam worldwide. So it is an achievement, but it's a relevant achievement, and that is why I included it, because it shows that I have the capacity for sustained work, because I didn't have a GCSE background, and so I was being refused from school, but I had that persistence, and I had that sustained work ability, which they asked for in their requirements. Then I said, through A-level physics, I developed skills such as critical thinking, interrelating concepts, and applying my knowledge to solve unfamiliar problems. All of these are skills for the PhD. So, specify those skills very clearly. Then this, along with my interest in molecular mechanisms of disease and a wish to make a difference in patients' lives, made me realize that a career in research was what I wished to pursue. So already in the first paragraph, I've answered their question of why do I want to do a PhD? And it's because I have this interest in molecular mechanisms, and what I want to do with it is, have an impact on patients' lives. And that's when I realized that a career in research was my way of doing that. To me, a PhD is an opportunity to immerse myself in a scientific question that captures my interest, contribute substantially to the field, and drive improvements in patient care. And it is, of course, a pathway into a research career which I'm passionate to pursue. Looking back onto it, I think, well, patients' lives, patient care, that's kind of repetitive. I could have maybe done without that. And then pathway into research career, I've mentioned here and here. So there's a bit of repetition. I would probably tell myself not to do that. But anyway, so this line gives them more detail on why a PhD, and it also demonstrates an understanding of what a PhD is, an opportunity to immerse yourself in a scientific question and to contribute to the field, to this first paragraph. And as you can see, every single line tells them something new about me, and hopefully conveys more messages across. So then, remember how they said it should focus more on research experience? So the next two biggest paragraphs of my personal statement were about my research experience, because that's what they asked for. So this was my first project, so I mentioned it first. I was one of the 21 students selected from around Europe to conduct research at the University of Cambridge as part of the highly competitive Amgen Scholars Program in the summer of 2016. So obviously, using words like highly competitive and stuff like that, it does tell them that, okay, you have already been involved in things that were competitive and been selected, through a rigorous thing. So that automatically tells them that, this candidate is worth keeping in mind. And so my project aimed to explore the role of piezo-1, a mechanosensitive ion channel, in stem cell lineage specification using mouse embryonic stem cells as a model. Now, this is a lot of scientific jargon, but because I'm applying to, a science program and these supervisors will generally know these words, I can mention the specific details. And that's very important to do as well. Tell them what you did, because they asked about your research experience. So, as it is a recently identified protein, antibodies against piezo-1 were not very specific, and the immunocytochemistry protocol needed significant optimization. So now this is telling them exactly what I then did. It doesn't just generally talk about the project, but it gives very specific examples of the challenges that I faced. That, oh, it was recently identified. We couldn't really work well with the protein and stuff like that. Then, alongside the optimization, I suggested to use qPCR to study piezo-1 levels and use flow cytometry to study the effect of piezo-1 inhibition on the differentiated state of the cells. So it doesn't matter if you can't understand any of that, it's fine. The main thing to pick out from here is that I'm talking about specific techniques that I used, qPCR, flow cytometry, and this bit I suggested. It shows that you took initiative and you contributed, not just I was told to do this or I did this, but it shows a bit more. So every word, really think about that. And then I drive home the point with the next line. I thus learned to take initiative and drive my own learning, which is exactly what is needed with the PhD. So already, I hope that people reading this statement were like, okay, this person takes initiative in their own project, but if I just wrote this line, during this project, I learned to take initiative and drive my own learning. That would have been useless without the actual example I gave, because anybody can make this stuff up, like, oh, I was so great in this project, but give them an example as proof and as evidence of this bit. And then lastly, I presented my findings as a poster at the Amgen Scholar Symposium and later at the Physics of Living Matter conference at Cambridge, being the only undergraduate presenting. And this happened because there was this conference and I asked my supervisor if I could apply to present a poster, and he never got back to me. And I just applied anyway, which you probably shouldn't do. And then people in the lab, when I asked them, they were like, I think you're a bit too young to present and it's just an undergraduate project. But I was like, I can just apply. And they selected it. And I don't think they had a very, specific criteria selecting people. But if you apply, you're more likely to be selected. And also, this line shows a very important skill in research, which is communication and presenting, because you will be asked to present your findings, as a poster or in conferences, stuff like that. So again, it shows that, okay, this person has that experience, is ready to do that during a PhD. Then then I talked about my other research project, which was my undergraduate research project. So talking more about your research experience, which, as I mentioned before, should be the focus according to these criteria for my program. So I conducted my undergraduate research project at Dr. Kermaghan's lab at the Barts Cancer Institute, where I explored the role of c-Met in chemo resistance in ovarian cancer. As my research had potential for clinical impact, I was enthused to delve deep into the research question, critically analyze our hypothesis, and support designs of additional experiments. So with the first line, when you're talking about the research experience here, I didn't just describe my research experience, but I used it to demonstrate what I learned. Not in this line, but in general, when you're talking about research experience, don't just describe it. Use it to demonstrate what you have learned and what you've gained and what you've contributed and how you did things differently, and also what skills you now have for a PhD. And then look at this word. I was enthused to delve deep. Like, enthusiasm, that's important. They actually, this sort of biases, or this does impact how you come across at interviews, because if they can see that you're actually enthusiastic about the research project, that conveys that you're actually interested. You will actually do we put in the effort and stuff like that. Then again, skills completely relevant for a PhD. Critically analyze our hypothesis, suggest designs of additional experiments is exactly what you do in a PhD. Then, after widely reviewing the literature, I postulated a number of molecular mechanisms whereby c-Met activation could contribute to chemo resistance, which I'm now in the process of compiling into a review article for publication. So in a single line, I could have not used this bit and just said I postulated, but then I wanted to make sure I said after widely reviewing the literature, because again, shows them a skill that I have. Then another thing you have to do as an academic is obviously publication. So just talking about how you're compiling and you're in the process. This review article never ended up getting written or published or anything like that. But at the time I was working on it, so I did put it in. Then more driving home sentences, which this critical reading also helped me to identify the potential drawbacks of our experiments. Now, I could have just said this helped me to identify, but I said this critical reading. It's just like sort of these buzzwords and relevant buzzwords that you should sort of include, because now they're like, oh, great, they can't just review the literature, they can critically read the literature. And so potential drawbacks of our experiment: not testing directly the synergistic effect between c-Met inhibitors and chemotherapy, not using a clinically relevant c-Met inhibitor, using a cell line that was not stably chemo resistant, and blah, blah. So again, specific examples, because anybody can say, oh yeah, I did some critical reading and these were some drawbacks, but you have to back it up with evidence. That's probably the most important bit. So, another paragraph. Well, it's the previous paragraph on research experience continued. I was also able to pinpoint the strong suits of our experiments over previous studies, performing experiments in suspension and better modeling clinically acquired resistance, blah, blah. So again, specific examples, which gives evidence, and you're not just saying random stuff without any evidence or backing up. Then, when faced with the inevitable challenges in research, I learned to remain persistent and open-minded. So this is something they look for in interviews. Almost every interview that I had attended for PhD applications, asked me in some form of another, how do you cope with failure, or what happens, you know, what was a time that was really challenging for you and what did you do to overcome it, stuff like that. So they want to see that you have that persistence and that you do cope in failure, because within research there is just 90% of the time your experiments fail, so you need to be able to cope with that. For example, and then again, example, I was able to use results from even failed experiments in the project to provide more evidence for our hypothesis and to argue later that the inconclusive results were not due to the pharmacological inhibitors off-target effects. So this bit shows creativity. And so you can see now, you know, every line I'm like, okay, what am I highlighting here? What does this show? What does this show? It's very intentional. Then here, through both projects, I came to really enjoy the process of scientific discovery, the intellectual challenge, the critical thinking, the repeated learning from mistakes, the ensuing elation upon a success, and the benefits of discussion. So again, enjoy, enthusiasm, which is always a great thing to show. And if you enjoy the process of research, you're more likely to actually go through with the PhD towards the very end, because things get really tough. But if you enjoy repeated learning from mistakes, then, you know, they're more likely to select you over someone who hates that process. And then I also enjoyed communicating my findings in an oral presentation to a wider audience at the British Conference of Undergraduate Research. So again, more examples of how I communicated. So that was all that I mentioned in terms of research experience. And then I used the next bit to say why I'm actually applying to this particular PhD and this particular field of research. This was just something like a personal journey that I wanted to comment on, and I said that my supervisors encouraged me to pursue a PhD directly after graduating. However, I chose to pursue a master's first, as it would not only further polish my research skills through the 6-month project, but also refine my research interests, ensuring I embark on a PhD with the approach of a young scientist rather than a student. So this was just something extra and personal. And I just added it because I thought it showed a bit more ambition and a bit more clarity of how I wanted to approach my PhD, you know, with the approach of a scientist rather than a student just getting started and stuff like that. During my master's, I was introduced to the role of epigenetics in cancer for the first time and was instantly fascinated. I realized this was a field that was crucial in shaping our understanding of cancer, yet very little is known about it, representing a great niche to work in. So now I'm telling them why I'm applying to these projects. So the way my application worked was that you applied to the department, and then every year they list available supervisors that are available to take on a PhD student and their projects proposals. And so from that, you choose different projects. And all of my priorities were the epigenetics ones. I found fascinating that all the concepts of the genetic origins of cancer and the hallmarks could be widened to include epigenetic mechanisms, et cetera, et cetera. So now I'm demonstrating knowledge of the field, right? And this was, again, they asked for it. And also, I find it incredibly exciting that this fundamental research has the potential to be translated very quickly and thus fulfills my interest of combining fundamental research to a translational approach. So this ties in with personal goals and plans for the future as well, so that these projects I'm applying to, not only am I interested in them, but they also tie in with what I want to do in the future. The projects also offer an opportunity to learn cutting-edge genetic and epigenetic techniques, ensuring I stay up to speed in a rapidly developing field. So now in this sentence, what I said was, you know, what I will gain from these particular PhD students. And I usually mention like some techniques that I will learn. I don't know if I gave a specific example here, no, but it would have made it even better if I said, oh, this technique I'm really excited to learn because it's being used so much in this field, etc. Thus, I look forward to using knowledge gained through my degree and immersing myself in published work to drive my project and test my ideas in a very exciting context. So this line told them what I plan to do during my PhD, which was, okay, I want to continue, immersing myself in published work and testing my ideas and driving my project, etc., etc. That I had been doing it in my previous research experience, and I want to continue doing it in a PhD, and that's also why I'm applying to the PhD. And in addition, being in the intellectually stimulating and competitive environment at the University of Oxford will provide me with an opportunity to be challenged, sift my ideas through critical minds, and grow as a scientist, helping me reach my full potential. This opportunity to learn from and build connections with leading researchers is incredibly exciting and will prove invaluable. So a lot of times, when you're applying to a certain university, they also kind of want to know, okay, why this university, and you might not think that, why Oxford is, and you'd be like, oh, that's so obvious. Why should I even need to comment on that? But actually, for your field, Oxford might not be the best place, and so some other university could be better. So it's really important to evaluate. You don't just want the name on your CV, but you want to show them why you're here. Okay, then I'm sorry, Hazem, I'm gonna quickly finish pretty soon. I think that's, yeah, okay, great. So that's the last thing now. This was my last paragraph, and I said, through talking to postdocs and PIs, I've come to understand the unique challenges of academia, but regardless, I aspire to an academic career after my PhD and working closely with industry and clinicians to be at the interface of biology and medicine. So this bit, through talking to postdocs and PIs, this shows that I'm proactive. I'm gathering information from other people. I'm speaking, I'm making informed decisions, etc. That I understand that there are challenges in academia, etc., etc. And then this last half of the line told them more of the goals. And then this PhD will thus be crucial to my scientific development and serve as a stepping stone to help me achieve the goals that I aim to work tirelessly towards. And I always end most of my personal statements with this, help me achieve the goals I aim to work tirelessly towards. So you know that you want to work that hard. And if only I could stay true to this and work as hard as I thought I wanted to, that would be great. So did I cover everything they asked for? Reasons for applying, definitely. I told them, why I wanted to apply to a PhD, why I wanted to do this specific project, how it went in line with my future plans and career, evidence of motivation for and understanding of the proposed area of study. I did mention a few lines with, cancer and epigenetics and that kind of stuff. Commitment to the subject, yes, I was doing extra research projects, attending conferences, blah, blah, blah. Preliminary knowledge of research techniques, yes, I did say what techniques I used and what I want to learn. Capacity for sustained and intense work, I kept talking about, challenges and persistence and that kind of stuff. And then reasoning ability, so I gave very specific examples of how, I basically used my brain and gave specific examples of, times. So, and then did we do this bit? The personal statement should focus on your research experience in the field rather than personal achievements and interests. So although I mentioned interests and personal achievements, almost 50 to 60% of my personal statement focused on the research experience. So, so just a few other tips. This was me looking at a friend's personal statement and just had some advice. So sometimes what you can tend to do when you're talking about a field is just describe the field, or, this novel discovery allows accurate identification of a certain gene sequence. Like, it doesn't tell them anything about you. They already know about the field. So you don't just, don't write it like a news article. Make sure that every line sort of tells them something new about you. So I'm fascinated by this bit of this area, or this is an area I'm looking forward to explore, etc. And then sometimes people, I said this to her, I was like, don't talk in general about how cool pharmacology is, because again, it sounds like a news article. Tell them more about your experience of learning pharmacology and what you learned at university. And you can talk about your specific assignments or research and stuff like that. And then in terms of techniques, don't just give them a list of, this is, I studied these modules. No, it's just highlight things that were specific to you. And then I think one thing was that she didn't really link it to her career goals at all. And that's also quite important. And then I always, just think of each question in terms of chronology, like before the PhD, during the PhD, after the PhD. So why do you want to do a PhD? So talk about your journey before the PhD, what sparked your interest, and then what you're going to do during the PhD that you want to, and what about afterwards. Same thing with the knowledge. What knowledge do you have before the PhD? What do you want to gain during the PhD? And what are you going to do with that knowledge after the PhD? Same thing with the skills. What skills do you have? What skills do you want to learn? How do these skills fit in with your plans? And then ambitions, some unique things or ambitions like before the PhD. What is your ambition for your PhD? And what is your ambition for after your PhD? So that is me done. And I know I spoke a lot, but I hope that was helpful. And if Hazem, you would like to now just talk about a research proposal and how to write one. Where is Hazem?
I'm here.
Sorry. Okay. Sorry, couldn't see.
I was just thinking if it's you keep in time for questions later. Do you want to have people asking you direct questions maybe on what you just presented?
I think let's just do it later.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, you haven't left much to be said, really. You kind of covered everything. So my side of things will be more probably specific to degrees that require a research proposal rather than a personal statement. I'm not sure if this is the case for all of the humanities division or if it's also the case for the social sciences division. It might be a case per case thing, and each degree has a different thing going on. And also the word limit can be different. So in my case, for a DPhil in history of science and medicine, the research proposal is a requirement in addition to 3 references, a resume, and the other thing with the transcript, etc. The other requirements. The word limit is surprisingly small. It's only 1,000 words, and I'm not too sure what the limit on the personal statement was. But I can tell you that for sure, 1,000 words is not much if you're talking about a research proposal. For those of you who have written essays before and tutorials and all that, 1,000 words is very, very short. So before I delve into it, maybe just a few words about the field of history, because the advice which I'm about to give may not extend to all the degrees in the humanities. Certainly not in social sciences, and certainly not in the exact sciences as well. Particularly because with history, there is no such thing really as a sort of gatekeeping that happens with expertise. So history is really open to people of different backgrounds, and you might find yourself applying to a degree in history with a background which has no history at all in it. Just as my case is, I've done environmental studies before, media studies before, and I'm coming to history of science, which to some might sound like an exceedingly specialized field, but it's not. History really kind of keeps the doors open for people from different fields to come. And also the point of a PhD in history is not really to publish something which is going to be read by a specialized audience. You're not really aiming to publish research papers in academic journals, as is the case with most PhDs. You're really aiming to publish a history book, which is meant for a general audience, the wider public, if you want. And this is, again, because history is really a bridge field between the humanities and the social sciences. It doesn't have, per se, any sort of understanding of itself as a science. So there is no such thing as the scientific method in history. There is no such thing as a methodology or schools of thought which you want to follow, such as in the social sciences, evidence and primary data in order to produce results which are applicable. We're really looking at a big experiment with a lot of different opinions and also ways of doing things, different approaches, depending on depending on what you're intending to produce. So with that said, maybe I can show you or give you a brief look onto my actual proposal. Let me try to share my screen. Can anyone confirm if you can see?
Yeah, we can see it, Hazem.
Excellent. So a proposal, obviously, a research proposal has a few components. If you want, in general, it's not a piece of natural writing. It's definitely something which you could consider as mechanical sort of writing. Just as Hira was explaining, every sentence has a purpose, every paragraph has a purpose. It adds up to something which to some extent is coherent but doesn't flow in any way. So it's not a nice thing to read. It's very mechanical, dry, and it's trying to get your message across in a very easy to understand manner. So when it comes to a research proposal in history, obviously you have a working title, you have the importance of your question. Why is it even important to look at the topic you're suggesting? And after that, you have a little bit about how you claim to have basically an awareness of what's written about this from before. You talk about maybe the gaps that exist in what's written and how you hope to fill those. Then you have a small section on historiography, which is basically, again, restating or studying quickly, analyzing the trends in the study of your topic. You move on to methodology, which is just, a section that happens to be there to mimic a lot of other structures of research proposals, but what's asking for in this case is really your approach and your sources, meaning what documents will you be using. Whenever you're doing history, you have to talk about which documents. Are you talking about archives? Are there particular books or objects you're talking about? What kind of access you have to those, etc. And finally, maybe a word or two on how you qualify as a person to do that research. So just to maybe do a quick flyover, you have over here my title and my subtitle. So the idea is really to, again, give the generalization and the case study, or in this case, maybe the wider outlook and then the specific section, period, and geography that you'll be studying. And in the case of history of science, it's not necessarily the case that you'll have to periodize and also kind of pinpoint the location, but it can also be done in terms of ideas. So you can be tracing an idea, such as, for example, the conception of nature, such as I've done here, without necessarily pinpointing it to a location or a time. You can do multiple places and multiple timescales as well. So my first paragraph is basically saying why is this interesting, and it's again like what Hira was saying, the eye-catching bit. My attempt really was to focus on this idea of instrumentalization of the knowledge of the past. Basically, we study the past in order to do things in the future, or to perpetuate agendas, promote certain ideas. And doing this too much can be risky because it gives us a biased view of the past. And in that sense, that's the idea I'm focusing on to be able to sell my research proposal. I move on to basically speak about one of the cases that has suffered from this instrumentalization the most, namely the case of medieval Islamic Spain, Al-Andalus. I mention quickly what happened at that time, and I, over here, cite a few people who have already spoken about the agricultural revolution. So I show that I'm aware a bit of what's been said. And obviously, even if the claims are being debated, I'm saying that it's still seen as a hallmark of medieval sustainability, and thus, because another person very famous in the field says this, this, and that. My argument still stands. And then I go into the list of howevers, however this, however that, only to end with, by the end of the first page, you want to really get to this, the aim of my project. What is it? And I'm saying here that is to bring into focus the, not the origin of the agricultural techniques that I'm studying, not the extent to which they constitute an agricultural revolution, both points which I touched upon before, but rather a description of the cosmos in which the figures of this school, the school of thought, the 11th century school of thought of husbandry, lived and thought in order to provide the background necessary to a better understanding of Islamic science in Al-Andalus. So this bit is really what you want to call the golden nugget of the proposal. And if you don't already have that within yourself, it's going to be very hard to write around that without having an aim. If anything, you should probably start by writing this first. This is the paragraph which you want to write first, and it will guide what has to be written before it and what has to be written after it. It's very difficult to create a coherent proposal just from an idea. The idea has to be itself developed, and maybe it has to have fermented in your head quite a long time for it to be able to come out cleanly. A good advice in this case is just talk to a lot of people from different backgrounds about your idea and see what they ask you and see what needs to be clarified and see if people say that's interesting, that's maybe more about that, more about this. And that will ultimately lead you maybe to the construction of this paragraph, which I think is the most important. After that, we're just going into historiography, as you can see. So I'm saying that this has been studied, obviously mentioning a couple names to, again, emphasize the fact that you're aware of the literature. You're looking at mentioning literature from very recent dates as well. So you don't want to make arguments based on stuff which is only written in the 90s. You want to say that I'm aware of what's been written 2 years ago, for example. And obviously, you have to make some claims again, which is very difficult at this point because you might be asking yourself, well, the whole point of a PhD is to get to an answer and maybe more in-depth knowledge. So how could I write a proposal when I don't have that much knowledge about my topic yet? And the trick is to really read widely, but not in depth. Read a lot of stuff. Maybe don't read beyond the introduction and conclusion. Don't get into the meat of it yet. Just get a sense of what's being talked about. In the case of history, you can get a lot just from watching documentaries, reading articles, seeing all of these trends through what's being talked about in the general kind of media sphere, and maybe getting a sense by looking at the latest published publications as to the state of the field without spending too much time on it. This shouldn't take you more than a week in a best case scenario. That's how I would maybe quantify it. And then you finish on obviously a nice note saying that Islamic science, for example, in this case, has suffered from being studied solely with the aim of establishing a connection to other civilizations. Obviously, here you're making a big claim. You don't necessarily need to support it, but it's the claim that makes your research worthwhile. So if this is true, then what I'm doing is important. And over here, we're kind of relying on the committee who's going to be reviewing your work, their background, and maybe the fact that you already have found a supervisor and he's going to be reading this as well, or she's going to be reading this as well. And you want that to strike a chord with them, maybe to their personal research. So if you know, if they have a particular spin to their work or a particular trend that they're following, you want to ride that trend. So when you're done with the why is it important and what is it about and what's been written about it before and the aim of it, then you move into the more mechanical bits, your research questions. This is kind of pinning down the topic exactly to what you'll be doing. So I'm talking about 4 people in the 11th century. These are their names. And the question I'm be looking at is this one. What was their cosmology and to what extent did they inform their agricultural work? And I am subdividing that question into 4 questions, which hopefully, if added together, we'll be able to answer the bigger questions. So very mechanical bit, nothing fancy there. Your methodology, next section, is basically talking about your methods. Here I'm talking about qualitative methods, and I'm studying texts of treatises of these four figures. So that's really it. That's the sentence that does it all. The rest is talking about sources. So talking about secondary sources in this case. For the most part, they're medieval accounts of the history of agriculture in Al-Andalus, which to some extent are also primary, but again, we're just talking more about how I'll be doing this work. And I'll be drawing from previous work on Islamic cosmological doctrines. So I'm not just drawing on work as has to do with agriculture. And, there's the why this methodology is important. It's a restatement of the aim of the project in a smaller version. Your sources, again, more specifics. Here I'm talking about what writings I'll be looking at. So 4 people, yes, but they've written many books. I'm selecting the books which are about these topics, and they happen to be 4 books. Here are their names, and I'll be using critical editions. So I'm not using manuscripts, I'm using existing translations, and I'm aware of where these existing translations and critical editions exist. So it's always good to show that you've done a little bit of work. A little bit of talking about your skills. So here, language skills happen to be the most important aspect of this. So I'm saying that I speak all the languages in which research has been published, and that gives me a bit of an edge. And you finish with your references, what you exactly referenced in this work, and maybe also further bibliography. So saying these are the other books which are important, but I didn't happen to mention directly. So I'll stop here. I tried not to go over time, but let me know if we still have space for questions.
Yeah, I'm trying to see if anyone has any questions. Thank you for sharing that. I'm just thanking God I didn't have to write a research proposal, because for that you actually have to do work rather than sit down and just talk about yourself. 2 pages. So if anyone has any questions, please send them in the chat or raise your hand, and you can unmute your mic in that case. A lot of people are asking if they'll get a recording. So yes, this is being recorded. The whole event has been, and we will upload it on the Oxford University Islamic Society YouTube page, and also the Muslim Researchers Network YouTube page. So I don't think there are any questions. I think we've covered everything really well in that case. So I think we'll just wrap up then. So I would just like to thank everyone for attending today and staying till the very end. I hope you found it really useful and helpful, and you feel more ready to actually go and apply. And of course, you can sign up to the mentorship scheme on the Muslim Researchers Network website that we mentioned. And also, yes, recordings will be sent out to you. So yeah, I'm glad. Yeah, people are sending good feedback that they found it helpful. Thank you. All right, everyone. See you inshallah in another event.
Excellent. Thank you very much.